The sun bled crimson across the Wyoming horizon, painting the sagebrush in hues of fire and shadow. In the stillness of dawn, a scream tore through the silence, a raw, guttural cry that no human throat should make. It was the kind of sound that stopped a man's heart before his mind could catch up. Ezra Caldwell, a rancher weathered by 50 winters, dropped his coffee mug, the ceramic shattering on the porch of his lonely homestead. He didn't know it yet, but that scream would unravel the threads of his solitary life and weave a story that would echo across the plains for years to come. Ezra had lived alone on his sprawling ranch since his wife, Clara, passed a decade ago. The land was his only companion, vast and unforgiving, dotted with cattle and memories. He'd grown accustomed to the quiet, the kind that pressed against your ears until you heard your own heartbeat. But that morning, the scream wasn't his imagination. It came from the cottonwood grove beyond the barn, where the trees stood like sentinels guarding secrets. Grabbing his rifle, more out of habit than intent, Ezra sprinted toward the sound, his boots kicking up dust that hadn't settled since the last rain. The grove was eerily still when he arrived, the air thick with the scent of sap and something sharper, fear. There, hanging from a low branch, was a young girl, no older than 16, her wrists bound with coarse rope. Her dark hair fell in tangled strands over a face bruised but defiant, her eyes blazing with a fire that hadn't been snuffed out by whatever horror had brought her here. Around her neck hung a crude wooden sign, the words carved deep, "White man don't forgive." Ezra's breath caught, his heart hammering as he cut her down, her slight frame collapsing into his arms. She was Apache, he could tell by her features, her clothing a mix of traditional beadwork and tattered cotton that spoke of a life caught between worlds. "Who did this?" he demanded, his voice rough as gravel. The girl, gasping for air, only shook her head, her eyes darting to the shadows as if expecting her tormentors to return. Ezra carried her to the ranch house, his mind racing. He wasn't a man prone to heroics, he'd spent years avoiding the world beyond his fences. But something about her, maybe the defiance in her gaze, maybe the echo of his own daughter's face, lost to fever years ago, stirred a protectiveness he thought had died with Clara. Her name was Nizhoni, she told him later, her voice soft but steady. She'd been traveling with her brother, Taza, to find their uncle in the Black Hills when they were ambushed by men she wouldn't name. They'd beaten Taza, left him for dead, and strung her up as a warning, a message to any native who dared cross into white man's land. Ezra listened, his jaw tight, the weight of her words settling like stones in his chest. He knew the kind of men she described, bitter drifters, fueled by whiskey and old grudges, the kind who saw the world in black and white in blood. They roamed these parts, their hatred of poison seeping into the land. Ezra gave Nizhoni a bed, food, and a promise to find her brother. He didn't know why he made that promise, maybe it was guilt for the years he'd turned a blind eye to the tensions simmering beyond his ranch. Maybe it was the way Nizhoni's hands trembled when she spoke of Taza, her only family left. Whatever the reason, he saddled his horse, Rusty, and set out with her at dawn, her directions guiding them toward a dry creek bed where the ambush had happened. The journey was fraught from the start. The plains were vast, deceptive, hiding dangers in their folds. Ezra wasn't young anymore, his knees ached, and his eyes strained against the glare of the sun. Nizhoni, the week from her ordeal, was sharp-eyed and resilient, pointing out tracks he'd have missed, a broken twig, a scuff in the dirt. She spoke little, but when she did, her words carried the weight of someone who'd seen too much for her years. "My people are scattered," she said one night by the fire, her voice barely above a whisper. "The world wants us gone, but we keep breathing." Ezra didn't know how to respond, he'd never had to face that kind of erasure. Instead, he offered her more stew, a small gesture that felt inadequate but was all he had. Days passed, and the trail grew colder. Doubt not at Ezra. What was he doing, dragging this girl across the wilderness? He was no tracker, no hero. But then they found it, a blood-stained patch of earth near the creek, a torn scrap of Nizhoni's beadwork clutched in the dirt. Her face crumpled, and for the first time, she cried, her sobs muffled against her sleeve. Ezra felt his own throat tighten. He'd lost too much to promise her everything would be all right, but he knelt beside her, his hand hovering over her shoulder, unsure if touch would comfort or intrude. They pressed on, driven by Nizhoni's certainty that Taza was alive. Their search led them to a ramshackle saloon in a forgotten town, the kind of place where men with dark hearts gathered. Ezra's gut twisted as they approached. He knew the risk of walking in as a lone rancher with an Apache girl. Inside, the air was thick with smoke and suspicion. Eyes followed them, cold and calculating. Nizhoni's hand brushed the knife she tucked into her belt, a gift from Ezra's own supplies. He scanned the room, spotting a man with a scar across his cheek, a face Nizhoni's description had burned into his memory. The confrontation was swift and ugly. The scarred man, drunk and belligerent, laughed when Ezra demanded answers about Taza. "You think you can play savior, old man?" he sneered, his hand on a pistol. Nizhoni's voice cut through the tension, sharp and unafraid. "Where's my brother?" The room went quiet, the weight of her courage shifting the air. Ezra didn't hesitate. He drew his rifle, not to shoot but to make a point. "We're leaving with answers," he said, his voice steady despite the fear clawing at him. The scarred man's bravado faltered under Nizhoni's gaze. He spat out a location, a derelict mine a day's ride away, before Ezra and Nizhoni backed out, the saloon's patrons watching like wolves. The ride to the mine was tense, the silence between them heavy with what they might find. When they arrived, the mine's entrance gaped like a wound in the earth. Inside, they found Taza, battered but alive, chained to a post. Nizhoni's cry of relief echoed in the dark, and Ezra worked quickly to free him, his hands shaking not from fear but from the weight of what this moment meant. The return to the ranch wasn't the end of their troubles. Word of their actions spread, and the men who'd ambushed Nizhoni and Taza weren't the kind to let defiance go unpunished. One night, as Ezra taught Taza how to mend a fence and Nizhoni cooked fry bread in the kitchen, hoofbeats thundered toward the ranch. 3 men, including the scarred one, came for blood. Ezra sent Nizhoni and Taza to the cellar, but Nizhoni refused, gripping her knife with a fire in her eyes. "I won't hide," she said, and Taza, still weak, nodded in agreement. The standoff was brutal but brief. Ezra's rifle and Nizhoni's quick thinking, tossing a lantern to startle the men's horses, gave them the upper hand. The scarred man fled, wounded, and the others followed, their threats swallowed by the night. Ezra knew was no hero, but he'd fought for something that night, something bigger than himself. As the dust settled, he looked at Nizhoni and Taza, their faces lit by the flickering lantern, and felt a warmth he hadn't known in years. Weeks later, Nizhoni and Taza prepared to leave for their uncle's home. Ezra gave them supplies, a horse, and a map, though he knew Nizhoni could navigate the stars better than any map. At the edge of the ranch, Nizhoni hugged him, her grip fierce and fleeting. "You're not as alone as you think," she whispered. Ezra couldn't speak, only nodded, his eyes burning as they rode away. The ranch was quiet again, but it didn't feel empty anymore. Ezra sat on his porch, watching the sunset, and thought of Clara, of his daughter, of Nizhoni's words. He'd been a man adrift, but saving 2 lives had anchored him. He didn't know if he'd see them again, but he knew one thing: forgiveness wasn't about forgetting, it was about choosing to build something new. And as the stars emerged, he felt, for the first time in years, that he wasn't just surviving, but living.